Coming up today on Locked On at Texas Tech, who are we? Joey McGuire's identity rolling into year 4 and a little reminiscent as we travel back in time to year 4 of a golden era for Red Raider football. Next on Locked On Texas Tech.
You are Locked On Texas Tech, your daily podcast on the Texas Tech Red Raiders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Great to be with you again on Locked On Texas Tech on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, always free and available on YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts. And thanks as always for making us your first listen. Today's episode brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money and use our code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. With the only Chris Level, I'm Casey Cowan, back to kick off another glorious week, Chris, that takes us nearer to the end of July, nearer to the beginning of fall camp, and nearer to a kickoff just around the corner for year 4 of the Joey McGuire experience. And that's something we're going to focus in on today's episode. I want to do some comparing and contrasting, some of this rooted in some recent looks at what some people feel like is, say, a Big 12 head coach ranking or a national college football head coach ranking. Not so much about those numbers here today, Chris, but I want to assess kind of your perspective and some of our audience's perspective here locally as to where we see his identity as a head coach going into this season. We'll compare and contrast with the most recent successful era for a head coach. Unfortunately, got to go back a ways, but it's a fond memory, I guess, at least. Mike Leach, entering year 4, leaving year 3. Where was he from an identity standpoint, and how did that change or remain the same over time? You were there for an up-close and personal look at that, Chris, so probably nobody better to ask than you about that. But I want to get into what that looks like for Coach McGuire, identity entering into year 4. And to kick it off, I'm sure you've seen some of what I've seen as far as some perspectives and takes on where he falls within the Big 12 head coaching landscape and maybe the nation. Kind of seeing some middle tier, really, for the most part, is just generally what I would describe it as. And I guess personally, I don't have a strong take that's errant based on the evidence that we've got so far, but wondering how it kind of settles with you when you see where he's been slotted for the most part.
Yeah, I remember, like, going back to, like, Mike, I remember, like, the first – there were big wins mixed in the first several years, but it was I think it was the Holiday Bowl in 2004 when you beat Cal that felt like a moment. It was like a kick down the door, like very meaningful national – I mean, you beat Aaron Rodgers and – they had been snubbed, and anyway, it was a good game. There was pros all over the field for Cal, and you won that game, and that kind of started to set you up for a different tier or a different run. The next year you would go to the Cotton Bowl, and you won 9 games, but even then there was a mixed in, like, the next year there was like that old Oklahoma State just befuddling loss against a bad Oklahoma State team. Joey, where Joey is, and I get that you have head coach rankings. I mean, we rank everything these days. You rank all kinds of things, anything to put a list on it, especially this time of year. People are going to pay attention to it and react to it and all that. That's the point. But, I'm it's even fair if you don't have him in the middle tier in some ways. I mean, I certainly understand that. You get caught up into recency bias. You get caught up into, what's the whole giant body of work, or look what this guy's done in the last 10 years, even though he may have not done anything in the last 2 years, whatever. But Coach McGuire is, I think now he's tenured a bit now that he's in year 4. And let's just have an honest conversation. I mean, he would be the first one to tell you, yeah, I mean, I've got to go do it. That's what this whole offseason has been about. But what Joey is a hype man. Joey is a connector. Joey is transparent. Joey is a risk taker. Joey is a culture guy. Joey is very much glass half full. I mean, these are all things that, and then you get into the hard data. I mean, winning record in the first 3 years of his Big 12 tenure in each year. And have they gotten over the hump? No. Have they gotten to where they wanted to go? No. But it's been a lot better than it was.
Yeah, no question. I mean, I've described it for quite some time on this show as just sort of restoring a baseline pulse to the program, kind of having you back to where you should, at minimum, kind of expect to be year to year, and then obviously hoping to achieve much more. But yeah, I've felt that way as a fan. Like we've talked about it over the last few years. These boxes you got to check. Like, what do you really want to do as a program? You want to get back to restoring, a home field advantage. You want to win games on the road. You want to have a winning record in conference. You want to yada, yada, yada. So you've checked a lot of these boxes. You're trying to put it all together and compete for something you have not captured yet. So if you're in a conference hardware conversation, at least since the border conference era, shout out to the 40s and 50s. Great time, I assume, if the Red Raiders weren't winning that much. But you hadn't done much outright conference champion-wise since then, Chris. I mean, we're talking divisional achievement if we're going back to some fond memories recently. Unfortunately, we all know the context of that league, but whatever. That's what the trophy case looks like. So you're trying to be somewhere that you haven't really been before. And I think from the standpoint of what you talked about there, whether it's hype or connecting the program, whether it's obviously recruiting and things like that we'll get into a little bit further on an upcoming episode. He's checked a lot of these boxes, and you have had some exciting wins, proof of performance on the field. You roll out of the gates and you're talking about taking down Longhorns and Sooners. And then maybe you're talking about, save something for the following year, coach. That's a pretty lofty achievement just right out on the jump. But I do feel like when you're considering, sort of the makeup of a head coach or his staff, there are always roles to be filled, right? Not everybody is everything, whether it's a head coach or an assistant. Are you X's and O's driven? Are you recruiting driven? Are you, fundraising driven in the case of maybe a head coach or whatever it might be? I'm curious how you see that maybe in some of those most successful eras that you've covered at Tech or across the Big 12. Like, what does that most successful makeup of a staff or head coach actually look like? Because clearly a guy like Mike Leach, very X's and O's driven. That's his entire thing. And then you've had maybe more so of a CEO here or there, and some of those have been successful, and it's more coordinator driven. Where are we with Coach McGuire, and what have you seen really over the years that you feel like does drive success maybe most consistently?
And you mentioned previous stints or eras, and like that's the one thing that Joey has, I guess, working against him is that like the conference is so different. And I'll get to answering your question in a second, but like the point I wanted to make before that, because it sets it up, is that, and you said it, like the year one, he beats Oklahoma and Texas. That around here, like, how did you do against Texas and Texas A&M back in the day? And everybody was so thrilled with your results over Texas A&M. They judged it differently, where you could mix in a loss here or there, but as long as you beat A&M, and Joey doesn't really have the benefit of that. He doesn't have the like right now, last year included, and there is no showcase game. There is no game that can make everybody feel better. You've got to accumulate wins. You've got to get to the championship and all those things. But I've always said that about coaches that.
First, today's episode brought to you by FanDuel, and summer sports are in full swing. Whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action, so why not make it a little more thrilling? And with FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. It's easy to use, fast to pay out, and makes even regular season games feel like must-watch events. And if you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet only $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet hits. Again, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. So open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started.
I've always said that about coaches, that And really, this could be, it doesn't matter if you're a position coach, a coordinator, or a head coach, but mainly I always talk about this when you're a head coach. And it's changed, and that's what I wanted to get into. But used to be you're either a motivator, you're a X's and O's guy, or you're a recruiter. And coaches would get labeled with one of those three. And very rarely could you check all three boxes as a head coach. I think you could fairly criticize and say Mike was a X's and O's guy and a motivator, but was he the strongest recruiter? You know,
if you like magic, possibly.
Yeah,
there's a kid out there that's really enamored with a card trick. Yeah,
that was always the knock is he working as hard on whether that's fair criticism or not. And I look at like the Bob Stoops is back in the day, or like Nick Saban recently. I mean, these were rare that checked all of the boxes.
I was going to say, if you filled all those things you're describing, you're probably one of the greats, right?
you're top of the top, yeah. And sometimes labels aren't fair, but this is the world we live in. But nowadays, with so many changes from year to year, it's that connector / culture component that is probably, that's the modern day head coach that succeeds. If you are frustrated with change, if you've got some intricate scheme that takes kids 2 to 3 years to play in before they really get it, and you're more of a, they got to be in this thing before the light comes on, and you haven't been able to adapt, that's a knock. Because so much is changing year to year, and you've got to be able to adapt and thrive. And I think Joey is perfect for 2025. Not that everything is perfect, but he's got the right mentality, the foresight. I think that he probably hasn't gotten enough credit for seeing the way this was going to go before it actually happened, and being like the general manager position is a prime example. Like, this is the way we're going to do this. Like, we need this support staff, but this is their job. This is what we're going to do, and I'm going to trust them. And that was totally unheard of 2 or 3 or 4 years ago. But it's the ability to connect and bring it together. And I've said this too. There's no two people in Lubbock, Texas, that have more pressure on them this year than Barron and Joey. Right, wrong, or indifferent, they will be the if it doesn't go well, or you don't quite get to where you want to go, whether it's fair or not, they will be attached with the blame for that. It's part of being a quarterback or part of being the head coach. But I think, and Joey's biggest challenges maybe not even are in mid-October or late November or early September even. It's really what's been going on in the last 6 months. And you'll know if you did well in mid-October, early November, late September, whatever, being able to bring this whole thing together and connect everybody and get everybody on the same page and introducing, hey, this is what we do here. This is what's important to us. This is how we do it. And he knew that back in early January, even mid-December, I guess. That was going to be their biggest task. And I guess it'll be show and tell at some point soon. Because what was one of the anonymous quotes we saw recently? It was one of the stories we touched on, did a show on, and somebody said, which we have done shows on this, but it was like, you'll find out everything you need to know about them when adversity hits. I completely agree. 1,000%. I don't think that's smack talking. I think that's just harsh reality of big time sports in 2025. You will find out everything you need to know, and you'll find out how good of a coach is, and whenever adversity hits, and how they bounce back from it, or how they deal with it. Is there finger pointing? Is there, I quit, I'm out, whatever. I'm checking it in. I'm not going to play hard for this guy anymore, whatever. And to Joey's credit, he's had teams that have played hard for him throughout. I think, because you tell me what, okay, I would say Wyoming was one. I think probably Washington State was one as well. even though, no Taj Brooks last year. What are like the bad losses, like the losses
Baylor.
that weren't? Yeah, well, Baylor last year, and I guess Baylor the first year, and those were more not that you lost, but how you lost. I'm trying to think of like the results where you're just like, because the first year, I mean, they were, they weren't great when they came in here and they were rolling. And then, as we look back, Baylor went on a run after it. But, and that may be some may consider that a bad loss. I would look at it more as like, okay, it's how you lost. But like showing up to the field as like a big time favorite and then botching it and giving it away. I don't know if that's happened too much. I mentioned the Wyoming one and the Washington State one. And I don't know if those are even fair, but that's been one of the, I think his strong points is they show up week to week. They don't really have these dips. You may have not gotten the results you wanted, but other than in those 2 Baylor games, you've been very competitive. And even in losses, you've been right there.
Well, I thought from a toughness perspective, I really feel like you became a tougher program, at least compared to the Kingsbury era. I thought you became a little more resilient and tougher just under Matt Wells, to where if you were down, you were not necessarily out. Under Cliff, if you were down, you were way out. I mean, the halftime record was crazy when you're trailing at halftime. I mean, so I thought that was kind of on the way in the right direction. I do feel like Coach McGuire has definitely continued to sustain and build upon that. And the week-to-week kind of measure, I think for the most part, you can say has been there. The start to the season has more so been the conversation, not the start to say games. We've talked about this before, and I'm sure we'll continue to, but just the fact that you've been digging out of a kind of hole of sorts, just as far as your football vibes to the first month of the year over the last couple of seasons, is not the best scenario, even though for the most part you have, I think, dug out of that and you've had some really fun years to follow, but maybe that's something they'll be able to avoid this time around. I'm enamored. I hope so as well, because it's even a different set of circumstances this time around when it comes to disappointment in the non-conference, if that were to be part of it. But I'm before we get on to kind of comparing and contrasting what we saw in place when Tech was most recently at their most successful under Mike Leach, talking year 3, year 4 kind of window and what was happening for Coach Leach and the Red Raiders at that time. I am enamored still with the aspect of Coach McGuire when it comes to sort of game day or in-game identity, because that can be kind of a different category in and of itself for one that is involved, and clearly he is involved. And there's been like some risk-taking riverboat gambler kind of style that we've seen before. We remember a lot of conversation about the book, Once Upon a Time, analytics. There have been moments where I thought it was even beyond just risk-taking or being wild, that almost seemed like here or there you're tempting football fate. So it's kind of been all over in that regard. I don't have a great feel really for what I even think he is within a game, because I feel like sort of the risk-taking, there's been ebbs and flows to that, and maybe it just means he's adaptable week to week. I have no idea, but that's one thing I'm still fascinated with, is what he is for 4 quarters as a head coach every Saturday.
You mentioned the Texas win in this first year, and they were 6 of 8 on 4th downs that game. That's basically why they won the game. And I think that a lot of this is based on the kind of game you're in, based on the kind of team you have, based on I think they kind of set that. It's because I think he has adapted, and so I think to call him adaptable, I think is very fair. I think that they maybe took more chances early on, and that was kind of their identity. I mean, we're rolling the dice, man. Like, we've got to create ourselves an advantage, and if we're not scared, that gives us an advantage, because we've got to play the numbers, and we're not going to waver. And it may look insane to some, but this is what we're doing. And large in part, it worked many times.
And you've touched on, Chris, like the talent level sometimes being tied into that willingness to take those risks.
And they know all of these things going into a game. They know Vegas spreads. They know who's got what on the other sideline based on how folks at the next level, and so all of it is factored in. And it does. So I think as time has gone along, he has backed off a bit of that. I think it used to be like, this is what we're doing no matter what. And now last year even, it was kind of like it's circumstances based, or it is yeah, that's not the kind of game it was, or we were playing pretty well. And so I didn't want to, I mean, there was plenty of times where you thought, man, he's going to go for it. And then they roll out the punter, or they kick it, or the field goal, or whatever. And I think and he kept getting asked about it. And I think it's, we didn't feel that way at this time, or this is not the kind of game that we were in, or whatever. And I would even, what is fascinating as we look on this season, because I think you touched on it, I don't want to say that they would become very conservative. That's not in his DNA. That's just not how he's going to roll. However, I could see where that makes some sense. You don't have to necessarily take some chances. They're always going to take some. I think that's just who he is. And we could argue that if your talent level is what you think, it could give you reason to even take more chances, be more aggressive at certain times. But I would be willing to bet you that this year on paper, as we look at, it's still, 6 weeks, 2 months away, there's a mixed bag there. I don't think it would be hardcore conservative or hardcore, we are doing exactly what this book says, hell or high water, and we're going to take every chance that it suggests that we take. I bet it's a mixed bag, but I could see a lot more reasons if you are what we think you will be, especially defensively, then you don't have to go for it on fourth down. Punt, play field position a little bit. The opposition doesn't have an answer. And so let's, I trust my defense. Whereas I think at times before, say it whatever you want, but there's probably been times where you're going to go for it. And while I think, Calvin, you would argue, you're screwing your defense there because you're putting them back out on the field in a bad spot. Whereas I think he was saying this is the only way we may have a chance to win the game is if we keep it in our offense's hands. And, so to each his own, but I think it's a great conversation to have. And that'll be one of the games within the games that we'll kind of be able to assess as we get going. And you may not even really know the answer there until we get to Salt Lake City.
Yeah. There are a lot of different ways to skin that cat, obviously. And but it's kind of funny because I think if I was in those shoes, I would probably be going in the opposite direction, sort of what you described there, in that because I believe in the football gods, the football fates and fortunes. You do what the game asks of you is what I believe week to week, which does represent some adaptability where you're doing things differently Saturday to Saturday. But Chris, I think if my talent level is low, I am a modest spender as far as risk and reward. But if the talent level was higher, I would just me, if I'm in those shoes, I'd probably be the guy that's like, let's take some chances now because we're going to make up the gap if it doesn't work out. Yeah. You could go any number of directions. And I'm so curious to see with such a different roster at his disposal this year, just kind of how that evolution continues. But let us know how you see Coach McGuire from that perspective, the identity, both overall program-wise, but within game as well on Saturdays. Let us know in the YouTube comments or shoot us a text if you're in the Matador Mob. And shout out to my guys Blake and Lance, John and Tanner, who I was texting with over the weekend, really on all the above that we've been talking about. And they're the ones that kind of got the wheels to turning to get into this conversation with you today, Chris. So appreciate you guys for throwing those thoughts out there over the weekend as well. And before we get out of here, I just wanted to take you back to when I was just a boy. I had hopes and dreams at this time, Chris. I was fresh out of high school and looking forward to time spent on Texas Tech's campus with what I didn't really know at that point for my entertainment was a golden era of Texas Tech football. We were early on still in the Mike Leach tenure. I want to go back and compare and contrast going into year 4 for Coach Leach. Maybe what you remember about his identity. Was it entrenched? Was it well known? Did it continue to evolve at that time? And just to remind folks where you were coming from, you had just come off of a year 3 that was wild. It ended with a 9-5 record. It included a loss to Ohio State. It included a win over Ole Miss. It included an all-timer, the greatest game never seen, over the Aggies in College Station, an all-timer in Lubbock over the University of Texas, and a slight 45-point humbling at the hands of the University of Oklahoma. But you wind up with a shiny number there, 9 wins. You're going into year 4. Chris, what do you remember about that time and sort of the conversation about the identity of the Pirate and the guy that was leading this program in the 806?
Well, Mike was before his time from the standpoint of he gets credited with changing the way that the game was played and in some ways is still played. And I think people were still new to that because it was very outside the box. Speaking of taking chances,
oh yeah,
I think he kind of, yeah. I mean,
there were newspaper columns written locally that were, let's just say, skeptical.
It was very outside the box, and he wasn't near as aggressive as people want to remember. But it was enough that it was so unconventional at the time that because now it's normal. Now it's like everybody knows the numbers and the book and the odds and all these different things, and that was. But he went for it on fourth down quite a bit. But it was also you were coming from. It was so drastic of a change from the way that your program had been because you majored in the run game here. You played old school, really good defense, blue collar, and you ran the football. And it was rare that you threw it. And so then you come into this deal and he's throwing it and barely running it. And it was the complete opposite. But that's what they wanted. They wanted somebody, it was either him or Rich Rodriguez that was going to light up the scoreboard and kind of give the program an identity and the powers that be that decided on that certainly got what they wanted. But that to me was, and I don't even know if by that time there wasn't any really pirate stuff quite yet. He had maybe mentioned it, and I don't know if we were to the point in that time frame where there was the pirate flags and all the things that would be kind of a metamorphosis over time. But it was throwing the ball and 400 yards was the norm, for your QB. And, but that to me, that was, and I think that never being out of the game or high scoring games, that's what you started to be labeled with. But then you're never out of it. 1 and 2, you're going to get into some shootouts now. This is going to be a way of life. I think those were all attached to kind of that early start to Mike's tenure here.
What do you feel like even early on in that short kind of window, 2000 to 2003, evolved for Coach Leach? Do you remember seeing things kind of change just in those early years, or was it really, this is what I'm doing and this is what I will continue to do? This is the identity. Was the identity in place, even if it wasn't all about the pirate just yet or the special one or things like that? Do you feel like as a football team and program, year 4, the identity was, can I say, entrenched or firmly in place?
Yeah. I mean, Mike was stubborn. That's what made him so brilliant. I mean, like you talk about do what the game asks you and all those things. There's a lot of times we're like, okay, what is the game asking him to do right now? Because I ain't never seen this before. I mean,
the game doesn't even know what to ask at that point.
No, I mean, it was just before its time. And I think I think you were going to do what you did. And you were much like, I think Joey took that analytics part of it early on in year 1 or 2 or whatever, and was trying to create an advantage for themselves. We're going to do this. The other guy's not. Over time, if all is equal, we're going to win out, and we're going to create more chances for ourselves and by being aggressive and all those things. And I think Mike was trying to give that's what his offense was based on, is spreading everybody out. And then we may not have as good a talent as others, but we can neutralize that by getting them to try to make plays all over the field. And, it gives us, it always keeps us in a game because we can score quickly. Much like Joey's tenure, though, is like defense was a question mark at times, and it failed you at times, and it wasn't good enough at times. But I don't even know, like right now, if you would even say that like offense or defense was necessarily your identity here. It's more of the analytics, whereas we were watching it play out, but it was like it was all offense there. If you were playing defense, you just weren't getting any ink.
Year number 3 wound up with a nice win over Clemson in a bowl game. Your number 4 was a wild one, and there was some fun stuff involved. You finished your number 4 with a win over Navy down in Houston, and you shellacked the Aggies early on by 31 in Lubbock. You also had another win over Ole Miss, but you did fall to NC State. And then you remember some really tough ones at the end of the season. A 3-point loss in Austin to the Longhorns. I think that was the Too Good era, and maybe a kick that was either short or just a little off that possibly could have knotted that one up. And then 30 points going the wrong direction in Lubbock against the Sooners to wrap up the regular season. So, I mean, clearly, as we all probably remember, there was no perfection in place almost at any point, but certainly in these early years, still very much not. But Chris, you nailed it, and we've talked about it several times on this show. The extra point opportunities that came with so many collisions against in-state foes you really cared about, or blue blood programs from Oklahoma or wherever, they've just vanished in so many ways. And really a lot of that was happening even before Coach McGuire arrived. So the job has become in some ways a little more challenging to kind of gather up that steam or that extra credit with the fan base, because in part that is the primary driver of college sports. Can you beat our neighbor? Hey, do you want this job? And can you beat the neighbor? Can you beat the one that we really care about beating? I don't even care about some of these others, but a little bit different era now as far as that kind of thing goes. But big win opportunities, and I think you described it correctly, talking about having to kind of pile them up to generate that same type of wind in your sails as we look ahead to 2025. So hopefully we're going to be doing that, man. Thank you for the trip back down memory lane to an earlier era of Casey Cowan as a Red Raider on the other side of sort of that nurturing nest with parents, and I'd left the house, and all of a sudden it's like, all right, I got to make the decision as to how deep I dive into this thing known as Texas Tech football, because it can be withering and weathering or whatever. But we've made it this far, man. Chris, thanks for the time as always. Enjoyed it, and we'll see you for the next one.
Yeah, man. Keep hope alive, everybody. Getting closer. So we'll talk to everybody next time.
And get subscribed on YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts so you never miss an episode. Thanks to the Everydayers for always riding along, and thanks again to the Matador Mob for being out there. Hit the show notes and find a link to a free 14-day trial. That's your direct line to Chris and myself with one-on-one text and straight to your phone. If you've been one of those that were texting us about this, you would have already heard these thoughts, and you could have had a jump on this conversation. So think about it, roll it over, marinate on it. Let's see how you feel. Try it on for size. In the show notes, hit the link for a free 14-day trial. For Chris, I'm Casey. Thanks as always for the time, and we hope to see you back for the next round on Locked On Texas Tech.